Chapter 19. Do you know what you did wrong? Seeing Xiao Huan standing there with her head down, Li Yi pretended to be angry and said. Originally, he just drew a painting for the little maid on a whim. After she showed it off, Lu Rui also asked him to draw the same one. It was fine to draw, but why didn't he pay for it? Even brothers would settle accounts clearly, not to mention a sister-in-law. What if all the girls in the village came to ask him to draw? Although it wouldn't take a long time, Li Yi always felt uncomfortable if he didn't pay for the painting. The people in Willow Leaf Village were not particular about making people work without paying. The little maid looked down at her toes and rubbed the corner of her clothes with her hands. She blushed and didn't say anything. She would only do this when she made a mistake. After a moment, he heard a soft voice, "Young master, I know I was wrong." Li Yi raised his eyebrows and looked at her. "Okay, then tell me what you did wrong." The little maid thought for a while before she raised her head and said weakly, "I shouldn't show off your painting." Although she lowered her head to admit her mistake, the little maid didn't feel nervous at all. After getting along with him for so long, she already knew that the young master wasn't someone who would get angry easily. He was also very good to her, even better than Miss and Second Mississippi. The only time she was scared was when she cut her hand while helping the young master cut vegetables. Blood flowed out and she wanted to grab a handful of soil from the ground to sprinkle it on the wound, but the young master lost his temper with her. However, didn't the people in the stockade do this when they accidentally cut their hand or something else? She only remembered that at that time, she stood there feeling wronged and wanted to cry. Later, the young master dragged her to clean the wound and asked for medicine from Mississippi. Later, he even boiled a ball of gauze in a pot and used a pair of scissors to cut a strip for her. Every time she thought of these things, the little maid felt warm in her heart. Although she didn't know why the young master did that, she knew it was for her own good. The young master was a scholar and knew a lot. He couldn't be wrong. Li Yi wasn't really angry. Seeing the servant girl standing there with her head lowered, admitting her mistake, he waved his hand and said, "Go, go. Just be careful in the future." He did not know what Lu Rui was usually busy with and could only be seen at mealtimes. As for Lu Rui, Li Yi felt that it was better not to see her. In this small courtyard, there were only Li Yi and Li Yi. Towards this little servant girl, Li Yi was even more familiar with her than his wife in name and naturally would not blame her for this small matter. "Understood, young master," the little girl answered softly. When she walked out of the door, Lu Rui happened to come in with a pile of things in his arms. She rejected any bargaining. They clearly saw that Lu Rui didn't accept money from those close to the direct line of descent. Although they felt it was unfair, 30 copper coins wasn't a lot. Moreover, they were asking for help, so they paid honestly. Seeing Lu Rui walking over from afar, the women hurriedly went over to inquire. "At this time tomorrow, all of you wait here, I'll send the paintings over." After getting the answer they wanted from Lu Rui, the women then left in satisfaction. Putting aside their grudges with Lu Rui, they actually liked the paintings very much. Spending 30 copper coins for it wasn't something unacceptable. After the crowd left, Lu Rui took out her pouch from her sleeve and weighed it in her hand. The corners of her mouth curled into a smile. At this moment, when she thought about Li Yi's cheeky face, she actually didn't feel that he was so detestable anymore. At the same time, Li Yi had just finished counting the copper coins in the cloth pouch. 13 paintings and only 128 copper coins. What a profiteer. 2 copper coins less than me. Li Yi put all the copper coins back into the pouch unhappily. But very quickly, he smiled again. Weighing the weight, the smile on his face became even wider. No matter what, this was his first pot of gold in this world. Although it wasn't a lot, it was a good sign. Putting down the money pouch, he shouted towards the door, "Xiao Huan, come in and grind the ink." The servant girl outside the door responded. Not long after, a petite figure hurriedly ran in. Chapter 20. The women in the village had been preparing for many days, and it was finally Chinese Valentine's Day. As soon as Li Yi walked out of the door, he saw a high platform not far away. It was called the Qiqiao Building by Xiao Huan and the others. The four corners of the platform were tied with ribbons, and the atmosphere was very festive. On the platform were fried fruits, melons, and some simple dishes. Li Yi saw that Xiao Huan had taken things like needles and thread, brushes, and inkstones from home. He guessed that they would be used for tonight's activity. They really attached great importance to Chinese Valentine's Day. The snacks on the platform might not be eaten even during the Chinese New Year. It should be known that the average living standard of the Willow Leaf Village was not well off. Except for the family of the Liu family, which was slightly better, the others could barely get enough food and clothing. Because of Chinese Valentine's Day, Li Yi could find an excuse to give the naughty children a few days off. Most of the naughty children who were greedy for fruits, melons, and other snacks wandered around the Qiqiao building. They wanted to climb up and eat some, but when they approached the building, they were driven away by their sisters or the girls who decorated the building. Li Yi saw from afar that Lu Xiaohu was holding a stick and waving it vigorously. It was quite imposing, and he received countless envious looks from the naughty children around him. Most of the Liu family practiced martial arts. No matter men or women, they all had some kung fu. Putting aside Lu Rui and her sister for the moment, after witnessing his wife smash a solid wooden table and his sister-in-law chop a tree trunk as thick as an arm with a sword, Li Yi's voice became much softer at home. Of course, he only saw them by chance. He didn't have the chance to see them fight with others. However, Li Yi estimated that even 10 of him would not be a match for any one of them. As he learned more about this world, Li Yi began to realize that things like Wulin or Jianghu really existed here. Although he was not sure if there were fierce people who could fight against hundreds of enemies and capture the enemy from thousands of men and horses like in wuxia novels, the individual strength of the people who practice martial arts was far beyond Li Yi's imagination. In short, this world was very dangerous. He had to be careful when he went out. Li Yi felt that it was better to stay in the village. Lu Xiaohu was the leader of the children in the stronghold. He was the leader of the naughty children. He had been practicing martial arts with the adults since he was young, so his body was very strong. Li Yi stood at the side and watched with interest. "Hello, mister." Suddenly, a certain naughty child saw Li Yi behind him. After his body shook, he immediately bowed and called out respectfully. Only then did the naughty brats turn around. When they saw their teacher standing behind them, they all bowed in greeting, as if they had suddenly become obedient children. Lu Xiaohu also dropped the stick in his hand. Because he had just exercised, his face was a little flushed. He was slightly panting, but the expression on his face was very respectful. Among all the naughty children, the one who loved listening to Li Yi's stories the most was him. Although he was usually very naughty, in front of Li Yi, he would immediately become an obedient child. Currently, in the stronghold, no one could compare to Li Yi in terms of who was the most popular among the naughty children. Where else could they find a good teacher who wouldn't make them memorize those messy things, who would tell them stories, and who would often go on holidays? The naughty children felt that the current teacher was many times better than the old man from before. Li Yi nodded at the naughty children, then waved his hand and said, "Go and play." Seeing that the naughty children had dispersed, and just as he was about to go forward to take a look, he suddenly heard a cold snort. "What teacher?" "He's just someone to hold down the stronghold." The voice was a little familiar. It sounded like the kind of person who said that the grapes were sour because they couldn't eat them, or like a peach that they had been drooling over for a long time being plucked by someone else. Li Yi turned around and saw a young man standing not far behind him, looking at him with a rather unfriendly gaze. The moment he saw him, Li Yi remembered. Wasn't this the guy who had barged into the house with his second aunt, Madame Wu, and was scared away by Lu Rui in the end? The way this guy looked at him was like a dog that had seen a bone, which made Li Yi very unhappy. Sigh, wooing, don't say that. He's a scholar, after all. Just as the young man finished speaking, someone beside him spoke up. Scholar my ass, he's just someone to hold down the stronghold. Another person said. There were a few people beside the young man, and after a few words, they burst into laughter. Since ancient times, literature and martial arts had been opposed. Scholars, on the other hand, practiced martial arts. They thought that they were a bunch of boorish people with well-developed limbs but simple brains, and that they only knew how to show off their bravery. Similarly, those who practiced martial arts also looked down on scholars. They felt that they only knew how to talk and had no real ability. Even if they could recite a few poems and draw a few pictures, they would still be trash with only 5 points of combat power. What's more, the direct descendants never had a good impression of the direct descendants. Right now, Li Yi was labeled as a direct descendant. What are you doing here? A clear voice came from the side, and a few women walked down the stairs. When they saw Li Yi, a smile immediately appeared on their faces. The woman in the lead walked over, curtsied, and said, "Brother-in-law, you came at the right time. I just happen to have a matter that I need brother-in-law's help with." The woman in front of him was called Lu Yu. Her father was an old subordinate of the previous stronghold master, and she was about the same age as Lu Rui. Usually, they called each other sisters, but after getting to know each other, she called Li Yi brother-in-law. As for this woman, Li Yi had seen her before, but he didn't know her name, nor did he greet her. Later on, he didn't know why, but when they met again, her attitude suddenly became much warmer. It wasn't just her, even the girls beside her would smile and greet her when they saw her. Out of curiosity, Li Yi asked Xiao Huan and found out that they all liked his paintings on the sky lanterns. The reason was that he sold his paintings to the direct descendants for 30 copper coins each, but he didn't charge them a single coin. The girls all remembered his kindness in their hearts. When Xiao Huan said this, Li Yi's expression was dumbfounded, and he couldn't hear the rest of what she said. He only knew that Rui gave him 10 copper coins for each painting, and sold it for 30 copper coins. At that moment, Li Yi felt that he was an idiot. When the young man and the others saw that the girls treated him like air, but greeted Li Yi with smiles, they were very unhappy. The young man called Wuing coldly snorted and said, "What can a scholar do? If Miss Lu Yu has anything, just tell us." Although the two of them belonged to different camps, the young man with the surname Wu naturally wouldn't treat a beauty like he treated Li Yi. He patted his chest and said enthusiastically. Lu Yu turned around and looked at him with a strange expression. She said, "Today is Qixi, so I'll have to trouble you to compose a suitable Qixi poem." Qixi, poem. When the young man with the surname Wu heard this, his face froze, and then turned green and white. It was a wonderful scene. Compose a poem. He couldn't even read a word, how could he know how to compose a poem? If he knew that Lu Yu was looking for someone to compose a Qixi poem, he wouldn't have acted so pretentiously. Chapter 21. It was better to keep a low profile. Don't flirt with girls who are not you, and don't pretend to be cool if you are not. Looking at the young man with the surname Wu's face turning pale and embarrassed, Li Yi felt extremely happy. He couldn't even compose a Qixi poem, and he still had the nerve to pretend to be cool here. Although Li Yi couldn't compose it himself, he could copy it. After being here for so long, he had almost read all the books in the village. Although the people of Willow Leaf Village were not cultured, the books they had robbed were comprehensive enough for him to have a comprehensive understanding of this world. Of course, there were poems in this world, but they were not as prosperous as those in his previous world. Li Bai, Du Fu, Su Shi, Lu Yong, those famous literary giants in his previous world could not be found in this world. Li Yi could boldly be a plagiarist without worrying about being found out. Qixi poem. Li Yi might not be able to recite many poems, but he still had a deep impression of the poem that had been passed down through the ages and almost became a masterpiece. What's more, there were so many books in his head that he had not used yet. If he randomly took out 10,000 song poems, he would probably be able to kill people with the Qixi poem alone. I'm not talented, so I won't embarrass myself. The young man with the surname Wu's face was stiff. After looking at Li Yi, he said, I think the new son-in-law is good at reciting poems. Li Yi glanced at Wu indifferently and didn't bother to pay attention to him. Not talented. It was really shameless to use such a word to describe himself. If this guy knew how to write his name, Li Yi would consider himself well-read. He was obviously illiterate, but he still wanted to pretend to be knowledgeable. This kind of person was too disgusting. I happen to have a suitable Qixi poem in my mind. Do you have a pen and ink? Li Yi looked at Lu Yu with a smile and said. He was now slowly getting used to speaking in this tone. His genteel tone, coupled with his handsome appearance, really made him look like a scholar. His refined and courteous demeanor was not something that those rough men who only knew how to dance could compare to. The girls in the stockade were used to hardcore tastes. Occasionally, they would change to something fresh. Inevitably, they would have a feeling that their eyes would light up. The girls looked at him and thought about Wu Ying and the others. They felt that they were all born and raised by their parents. How could there be such a big difference between them? The Qiao Lu has a brush and ink, the woman named Lu Yu said with a smile. The youth surnamed Wu and the others tragically became the background. They could only watch as that hateful fellow was escorted up the pavilion by the women. He didn't even pay them any attention. His existence had broken the bottom line. I want to see what he can write. Anyway, he didn't know how to write with a brush. These words were a little ugly compared to ordinary scholars, but they were still pleasing to the eye. At least, he could distinguish them. There were many books in his head, but it wasn't that fast to learn. It was impossible to immediately go from a novice to a master level. Moreover, when his identity, his body, his face, and even the world he was in became unfamiliar, familiar handwriting could always give his soul a sense of belonging. Thus, the handwriting that looked ugly to others was very pleasing to Li Yi's eyes. When he turned to look, he saw that the maidservant's expression had collapsed. The other maidservants were also looking at him strangely. He couldn't help but ask in confusion, "What's wrong?" At this moment, he saw a delicate and scholarly maiden standing behind Lu Yu take a few steps forward. She ignored Li Yi's scrawling words and looked at the words on the sky prayer lantern. Her beautiful eyes lit up and she couldn't help but read it out loud. Delicate clouds play tricks, flying stars spread hate, the silver river passes through the darkness. She paused for a moment before continuing, when the golden wind and jade dew meet, it surpasses countless things in this world, tender feelings like water, a good night is like a dream, enduring the magpie bridge to return home. If two loves last for a long time. At this point, the maiden's eyes were already filled with amazement. Then, she became dazed. After a long silence, she read out the next line, "If two loves last for a long time, how can they stay together day and night?" The maiden's surname was Qin. Her grandfather was Mr. Qin, who used to teach at the academy. She had been taught by Mr. Qin since she was young, so she was quite well versed in poetry. When she started to read out the words, the hall quieted down. Although the maidservants didn't understand poetry and couldn't even read, it was already very impressive for them to be able to write a poem. Moreover, although they didn't understand poetry, Qin did. Looking at her expression, they could guess that the Qixi poem written by Li Yi was quite good. The youth with the surname Wu, who was blocked by the maidservants, wanted to say a few derogatory words after Li Yi finished writing. However, he couldn't think of any words no matter how hard he racked his brain. When he saw Qing's intoxicated expression and the maidservants' reactions, he couldn't help but snort coldly and leave the pavilion. Chapter 22. The burning turpentine heated up the air, and the sky lamp slowly rose into the sky. The fire gradually faded away, becoming smaller and smaller, and finally merged into the sky full of stars. The young girl put her palms together, her pretty face full of sincerity, and her heart full of good wishes, watching the sky lamp gradually drift away. After releasing the sky lamp to pray for blessings, there were more activities. The young girls laughed, the naughty children played, and the whole Willow Leaf village was in a lively atmosphere. Li leaned on a big tree under the building, his eyes and thoughts drifting away along with the sky lamp. At this moment, he was incompatible with this festive atmosphere. As a stranger in a foreign land, he missed his family more during festive occasions. The loneliness and misery of living in a foreign land had never been so clear before. The more lively the surrounding atmosphere, the more the feelings hidden in the bottom of Li Yi's heart were revealed, until he could no longer suppress it. His mother's nagging often annoyed him, and his several crazy friends also made him feel that he was not careful in making friends. He often scolded the black-hearted boss behind his back who didn't give him overtime pay for working overtime, and sometimes he would sigh about his messy life, but these were all the things he missed the most now. Li Yi, who was never very emotional, couldn't help but burst into tears at this moment. On top of the exquisite building, the woman stood there with her arms crossed, holding a long sword. She looked at the figure not far away, revealing a side of him that she had never seen before. A strange expression appeared on her face, one of surprise and astonishment. It was only now that she discovered that the impoverished scholar she thought she had seen through seemed to be covered with a mysterious veil. Son-in-law, a delicate figure ran over from afar. The young servant girl's pretty face was full of smiles, and her eyes curved into crescent moons. She lifted the hem of her clothes and said to Li Yi as if showing off, "Son-in-law, I stole some fruit from there." Suddenly, as if she found something, her clear voice became panicked. "Son-in-law, why are you crying?" Li Yi waved his sleeves and wiped the tears on his face without leaving a trace. He smiled and said, "It's nothing, sand got into my eyes just now." "Son-in-law, take these fruits, Xiao Huan will help you blow them." Under the girl's careful blowing sound, one of the sky prayer lanterns that rose into the sky swayed a few times in the air because the resin was about to burn out, then slowly fell down in a certain direction. In the dark night, the starlight cast a huge shadow. A magnificent city appeared in the flickering lights. The tall city walls separated the inside and outside of the city into two different worlds. The outside of the city was lonely and cold, but the atmosphere inside the city was almost boiling. The peddlers and shouts were mixed with the deafening sounds of gongs and firecrackers. For the people living in this city, the nightlife had just begun. On the main roads of the city, there was an endless stream of carriages and horses even before the sky turned dark. Outside the tall courtyard walls of some wealthy families, there was occasionally a corner of a colorful building. In the streets, alleys, brothels, and restaurants, all kinds of goods were displayed at the entrance, competing with each other in luxury. The ripples were clear and crystalline, reflecting the flickering lights on the surface of the river. There was an endless stream of pleasure boats and small boats. Singing and laughter lingered on the surface of the river, rising and falling again. And at this time, on a slowly moving two-story pleasure boat, a small poetry gathering had already reached its climax. "Brother Sue is so talented, I am ashamed. Tonight, Brother Sue's beautiful poem will probably take first place. It's just a coincidence. Naturally, I don't dare to say first place. I still need everyone's comments. Brother Sue is too humble. In terms of Chishi poems, no one here can compare to you." It seemed that a young scholar had made an excellent poem, attracting the admiration of the people around him. After a few excuses, youth Su couldn't help but show a proud expression. Although tonight was only a small poetry gathering, the participants were only a few not famous poetry societies. Even if their works could take first place, it could only be circulated in a small circle. By tomorrow, it would probably be drowned in the vast sea of poems. But at the very least, at this moment, the youth surnamed Sue enjoyed the praise of the people around him. If a female singer were to sing it later, his vanity would be greatly satisfied. Humph, don't you think it's too early to say such nonsense before the poetry gathering is over? In the midst of all the praises, there was a sudden cold snort, which was particularly harsh. Everyone turned their heads angrily and saw a few figures walking towards them. It's the Bailu Poetry Society. Seeing those people, the crowd frowned slightly. Obviously, they didn't like them. It was not strange. Since ancient times, scholars despised each other. Since they belonged to different poetry societies, they usually didn't look up to each other. In the poetry gathering, they were even more competitive. In particular, the other party had spoken rudely just now. Naturally, they wouldn't be nice to them. "Oh, what advice do you have, Brother Fong?" Youth Su raised his eyebrows and asked. "I can't say that I want to give advice, but I happened to get a Qixi poem by chance. How about asking the literary friends of the Dongli Poetry Club to correct it?" A young man in a cyan gown at the front said lightly. Chapter 23. This is, the Absolute Beauty was startled to see a strange object falling from the sky all of a sudden. When she saw the object at her feet clearly, a look of realization flashed across her pretty face. She bent down to pick up the object and said, "This is probably a sky prayer lamp that has burned out of oil and fell down, right?" According to the tradition of the Jing Kingdom, there would be people releasing sky prayer lanterns to pray for blessings on every festival, especially on the Double Seventh Festival and the Lantern Festival. Rosin or oil-stained cloth would eventually burn out, so it was not strange to pick up a sky prayer lantern on the night of the Double Seventh Festival. There are words on it, look at what's written. After being stunned for a moment, the female singer glanced at the sky prayer lantern in the lady's hand. An interested smile surfaced on her face as she spoke with a smile. The young girls of the Jing Kingdom would usually write their wishes on the sky lamp when they released it on the Double Seventh Festival. Most of them prayed that the Weaver Maiden would bestow them with a Rui husband, or bless them with feelings and peace. Everyone had a heart for gossip, let alone women. Even if they did not know a woman's secret, they would still be very interested. I'm afraid this is not what a gentleman would do." The Absolute Beauty looked hesitant. "We are young girls, we are not gentlemen." The female singer chuckled and took the sky lamp from the girl's hand. When she looked over, the first thing she saw was a painting. Actually, at first glance, the female singer was not sure if it was a painting. It was just a simple outline of lines without any color. It was different from any painting that she knew of, but it was these simple lines that outlined the beautiful scene of a magpie meeting on the bridge. The female singer was stunned for a moment as she had never seen such a strange painting. This painting. When the peerless beauty moved closer, a look of amazement appeared on her face. She muttered, "What a great magpie bridge meeting. I've never seen this kind of painting before. Although it's a little too simple, looking at it, it's quite interesting." The female singer's gaze lingered on the painting for a moment, then she said, "There are words here." However, when she saw the words beside the painting, she could not help but laugh. "It's baring its fangs and brandishing its claws without any rhyme or reason. I'm afraid it was written by an ignorant child." Then, he sighed and said, "It's a pity for this painting." Just as he was about to throw the sky prayer lantern away, the beautiful woman beside him suddenly said, "Wait a moment." She reached out to take the sky prayer lantern and carefully read the words on it. Immortal Magpie Bridge. When the Absolute Beauty recited these 3 words, the female singer's expression changed, and she blurted out, "It's the Qixi poem." As a songstress, most of the songs she sang were famous poems. This time, she was invited to participate in the Qixi poetry meet. When there was a good poem, she would sing it. She couldn't be more familiar with the names of these words. The beautiful woman nodded and ignored the crooked handwriting. She continued to read aloud. Delicate clouds play tricks, the flying stars spread hatred, the silver river passes in the dark. The courtesan nodded her head, and a look of praise appeared on her face. It's actually a new poem, and the use of words is exquisite. I'm afraid that the scholars downstairs wouldn't be able to come up with the first line. However, although the choice of words is exquisite, the intention is not enough. Flying stars spread hatred, still can't escape the pattern of the Chishi poetry meet. To these songstresses, they might not be able to come up with a good poem, but they had sung poems for many years. When it came to judging poems, they could be considered experts. Her evaluation of the first line was rather pertinent. However, at this moment, the songstress didn't see that when the lady next to her looked down again, her face gradually brightened. Delicate clouds play tricks, the flying stars spread hatred, the silver river passes in the dark. When the golden wind and jade do meet, it surpasses countless in this world. After reciting the poem, before the songstress could speak, the absolute beauty couldn't help but comment, a sudden turn of the peak, turning hatred into pity. What a good, when the golden wind and jade do meet, it surpasses countless in this world. Just this one line is better than thousands of lines by others. Actually, when the words reached this point, the idea and outline had already emerged. This poem was obviously different from the mournful style of the Chishi poems in the past. It was written in a different way. While it was graceful and subtle, it also left an endless aftertaste. The Chishi poetry meet had always been the theme of scholars. Since ancient times, it was unknown how many lines had been left behind. Although the choice of words was different, most of them followed the traditional theme of joy is short, and the style was sad and mournful. In contrast, this poem took a sudden turn of the peak, and was different from the usual. There was no resentment or hatred. Just from the idea alone, it was a level higher. Where's the lower palace? Quickly recite it. At this moment, the songstress was completely attracted by this poem, and couldn't help but urge. Even without the songstress's urging, the absolute beauty's gaze had already turned to the lower palace. This time, the songstress waited for a long time, but there was no sound. When she turned her head to look, she realized that the absolute beauty's face had already undergone some obvious changes. She revealed a formal expression, and muttered a few words. Her expression gradually changed from formal to stern, tender feelings like water, a good night is like a dream, enduring the road of Magpie Bridge home. The songstress couldn't recognize it, and she peeked over and read it softly. If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, how would they? When she read the last sentence, her voice gradually became softer, and finally, there was no more sound. On the pleasure boat, the two girls looked at the words on the sky lamp, and for a moment, they were dazed. Which girl didn't yearn for love? Which girl didn't fantasize about a period of sentimental love, finding a lover, helping each other in difficult times, and spending the rest of their lives together? But when the words, if the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, how would they be together day and night, appeared, it caused the girls' concept of love to waver. Love had to withstand the test of a long separation. As long as they could love each other sincerely, even if they were apart for a long time, it was much more precious than the vulgar pleasure of being together day and night. This was a difference in realm, and it far surpassed all the Chishi poetry they had seen before. The absolute beauty's red lips moved slightly, and she couldn't help but sing the immortal Magpie Bridge. This was a poem that she was extremely familiar with. The song was light and spirited, as if it came from the clouds, and floated on the surface of the river far away. Slightly behind the two of them, two green-robed scholars stood at the staircase. When they heard the song, an extremely shocked expression appeared on their faces. I really didn't expect Lady Ruoqing to be so talented. One of them murmured. What a good immortal Magpie Bridge. Whether it is the choice of words or the concept, they are all superb. We are ashamed that we can't compare. The person beside him had a look of shame on his face, and he tore the piece of paper in his hand that had his poem written on it into pieces. He was the publicly acknowledged winner of the Chishi poetry meet tonight, and he had wanted to bring his work up to be evaluated. After hearing the immortal Magpie Bridge, he no longer had that kind of thought. If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, how would they be together day and night? I'm afraid that just this sentence alone is enough to be passed down through the ages. After an unknown amount of time, the absolute beauty sighed. Her pretty face still had an expression of endless recollection, and it was obvious that her mood had been affected by this poem. At the same time, the two scholars also quietly came down the stairs, and walked into the cabin from outside. In a split second, several people surrounded them. Chapter 24. It was hard to leave one's homeland. On the night of the Double Seventh Festival, while others were busy dating girls, Li Yi couldn't control his emotions and tears streamed down his face because he missed his homeland. After missing his homeland enough, he still had to continue living. He didn't want to think about what the future would be like for the time being. What Li Yi should think about now was how to lead his family to prosperity. He said that the pain in the wind and rain is nothing. Wipe your tears and don't be afraid. At least we still have dreams. The servant girl was worried about her son-in-law and secretly hid outside the window to eavesdrop. When the strange singing in the room gradually disappeared, the servant girl looked up and felt slightly relieved. She also prepared to go back to her room to sleep. The sky was full of stars. As it was midnight, the lively atmosphere in the Willow Leaf village gradually died down. A little further away, the sword-wielding girl leaned against a willow tree that was as thick as a few people. She sensed the steady breathing in the room not far away from her. She slowly exhaled a mouthful of murky air and disappeared into the darkness. At this time, Li Yi, who had already reunited with his homeland in his sweet dream, didn't know that because of his unintentional action, an invisible wave was gradually rising somewhere far away, back to the pleasure boat. When two young scholars walked into the cabin, they were still in a trance as if they had suffered a great blow in their lives. At this time, there were already people surrounding them. Brother Fong, how is it? How did Lady Ruoqing evaluate it? Tonight's Double Seventh Festival poem was first place. Brother Fong must have been in the limelight in front of Lady Ruoqing this time, right? Of course. Brother Fong's poem, even in a large poetry gathering like Bishuan and Zhaowen, can be considered a masterpiece. Just now, after a round of competition, the scholar named Fang Zhou used an excellent Qixi poem to beat everyone else and took first place in the poetry meet. Everyone praised him generously. That poem was indeed a masterpiece. Even if it was placed in one of the most popular poetry gatherings tonight, it wouldn't be buried. Tomorrow, when someone sorted out the most outstanding poems of tonight's poetry gatherings and compiled it into a book, Fang Zhou's poem might also be on the list. At that time, he would probably become famous. Just now, he had taken it out from Miss Ruoqing to appraise. Now that he had returned, everyone came forward to ask him about it. If he had heard everyone's praises just now, the scholar named Fang Zhou would definitely have enjoyed it immensely. However, at this moment, he only felt an indescribable irony. He smiled bitterly and said, regarding the matter of first place, everyone, please do not mention it again. My words are really not worthy of these two words. He raised his hands in a fist salute and said, Miss Ruoqing is very talented. Now that this, immortal of the Magpie Bridge, has appeared, I'm afraid we don't need to write Qixi poems in the future. I didn't think that Miss Ruoqing was such a talented woman. My apologies. If you have such talent, why hide it earlier? Such talent really makes us men feel guilty. Although in this day and age, the status of women was not very high, but for those who were not any less talented than them, they could still receive the respect of these scholars. At this time, the beautiful woman had more or less understood why they would act like this. She hurriedly said, everyone may be mistaken. This, Immortal of the Magpie Bridge, is not, Miss Ruoqing, there is no need to be so modest. Brother Fong and Brother Wu heard it just now. Yes, I'm afraid we won't be able to write such a poem in our lifetime. There is no need to refuse. Seeing that everyone didn't seem to believe her explanation, a bitter smile appeared on the woman's face. She raised her hand and pressed it down. When her voice died down, she opened her mouth and said, "If I said that this poem fell from the sky and I happened to pick it up, would you believe me?" The surrounding atmosphere was silent for a moment, and then someone laughed out loud. "Hee, miss, you must be joking." Everyone looked at the beautiful woman strangely. Their faces revealed an expression that said, "Don't take us for fools." If this kind of poem could casually fall from the sky, then what was the point of having scholars like them? They might as well go home and farm, and compose some useless poem. Seeing this, the absolute beauty could only smile bitterly and take out the sky prayer lantern that she had picked up earlier. Not long after, between the two pleasure boats on the river, a paper raft was sent over. After it was picked up by someone, it spread like snowflakes. This was the usual practice in the past. During such a large-scale festival, if a poetry competition produced a good poem, it would be taken out to exchange and correct with others. The poem would be passed around in many poetry competitions. When dawn came, someone would extract 10 of the most popular poems and compile them into a book, naming it Chishi Poetry Collection or something like that. For a long time to come, these poems would become the signature songs of the brothels, and they would soon spread far and wide. Tonight, a poem on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month called Immortal of the Magpie Bridge spread through the two shores of the Yuan River in this manner, causing quite a commotion. At this time, in the Willow Leaf Village, the scholar named Li Yi suddenly felt a chill in his sleep. He unconsciously frowned and wrapped his blanket tightly around himself. He turned over and continued to sleep. Seeing this, the man was stunned again, then he scratched his head in embarrassment. "I'm really sorry, my hands are strong and I forgot that you are a scholar. Your body is weak, please don't blame me." Li Yi's face twitched a little. He wondered if this guy's honesty was fake. "Well, if there's nothing else, I'll go back first. My family is still waiting for me at home." The man rubbed his hands and said with some embarrassment, "Goodbye, Uncle Fong." Watching the man's figure disappear from afar, Xiaohuan sighed and said, "Son-in-law, you shouldn't have accepted these 2 pheasants just now." As Li Yi rubbed his still aching shoulder, he asked in confusion, "Why?" Previously, Master Fong's family was indebted to Uncle Fong's family. Now, there are only 2 young ladies left at home. Uncle Fong often sends some things over, and some of Master's old brothers from back then also help out with anything. The little servant girl's pretty eyebrows furrowed. She said, "Usually, the young lady doesn't let Xiaohuan accept these things. Their lives are not good." If the pheasants in his hands were the 2 hens from Lady Wu's house, Li Yi would definitely kill them and pluck their feathers without any psychological burden. One would make fried chicken steak, and the other would make chicken soup, but hearing Xiaohuan say this, he suddenly felt that the pheasants in his hands were much heavier. It was not good to accept kindness for no reason. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "How about this, we cook these 2 pheasants and send some to them as a return gift. What do you think?" Hearing this, the little servant girl's eyes suddenly lit up. She said, Okay, the food you cook is so delicious, they will definitely like it." Li Yi smiled. After putting the pheasants down, he waved his hand and said, "Clean up and go to the mountain to pick some fresh mushrooms. We will eat chicken stewed with mushrooms today." Chapter 26. A little girl picking mushrooms, carrying a large bamboo basket. Walking through the forest and hills barefooted in the early morning. The young girl's clear voice accompanied by a cheerful melody echoed on the mountain path. The young servant girl sang the song that the son-in-law had just taught her and bounced along the way. The small bamboo basket on her back was already filled with many mushrooms. The son-in-law was going to cook a dish that she had never eaten before in the afternoon. The young girl's heart was filled with a little anticipation, and even her footsteps became much lighter. Li Yi walked a few steps behind the young servant girl. Looking at this beautiful figure that seemed to be filled with limitless vitality, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart, "It's good to be young." The mushrooms that grew in the mountains were naturally harmless and fresh. Whether it was chicken stew with mushrooms or a bowl of delicious mushroom soup, they were the best choice of ingredients. "Son-in-law, come look, this mushroom is so beautiful." The young servant girl's startled voice once again rang in Li Yi's ear. When he turned his head to look, he found that Xiao Huan was excitedly running to a certain tree and plucking an orange-red mushroom that was covered with white scales. "This mushroom is so beautiful, it must be very delicious." The young servant girl walked in front of Li Yi as if she was asking for praise and said while holding the mushroom. Li Yi carefully looked at the mushroom in Xiao Huan's hand and quickly found a similar picture in an atlas of fungi in his mind. He then smiled and shook his head, saying, "This mushroom can't be eaten. If you eat it, you will have a stomachache." "Why?" The young girl didn't understand. Why would eating such a beautiful mushroom cause diarrhea? This is a fly-catching fungus, also known as a poisonous fly fungus. It is a type of poisonous mushroom. Li Yi once again acted as an encyclopedia for the young servant girl. "If you eat this mushroom, you will have a headache, stomachache, pain everywhere. In any case, this mushroom can't be eaten." The young servant girl looked at Li Yi and her big eyes began to twinkle like little stars. To be able to cook, draw, write poems, sing, and even be able to tell if a mushroom is poisonous at a glance. The son-in-law is amazing. In the future, you must remember that the prettier a mushroom is, the more likely it is to be a poisonous mushroom. Just like women, the prettier they are, the more dangerous they are. Seeing that most of the mushrooms had been picked and they were about to go home, Li Yi lectured the little servant girl on the philosophy of life. This little girl's mind was as pure as a piece of white paper. If she was sold, she would probably have to count the money for the other party. Usually, she had to set up a correct view of the world so that she would not be taken advantage of in the future. Perhaps it felt that the young man in front of it was very unfamiliar, so it barked at Li Yi twice. Suddenly, it fiercely sniffed its nose. When it glanced at the cornbread on the side, its eyes suddenly lit up. It bit the cornbread and disappeared in front of them at a shocking speed. Seeing this scene, the mischievous child was stunned, Xiao Huan was stunned, and Li Yi was stunned. The big man was also stunned. However, in the next moment, Li Yi suddenly heard an explosive roar in his ear. The big man's bear-like body had already chased after the dog. "Hey, if you dare eat that cornbread, I'll kill you today to go with my wine." Seeing the figure of the man and dog disappear, Li Yi looked down at the bowl of black food on the ground that emitted a strange smell. He already didn't have the mind to wonder why the yellow dog had such a domineering name as Hey. That big man gave them 2 pheasants, but his own family ate this kind of thing. This made Li Yi shocked, and he couldn't help but sink into deep thought. In the Willow Leaf village, the Liu family was like the landlord. They owned all the land, and although their lives weren't good, it wasn't too bad. However, most of the people were like the big man just now. They were almost equivalent to tenant farmers living at the lowest level of society. They were only able to feed their families and not starve to death. If they encountered a bad harvest year, they probably wouldn't even be able to fulfill this minimum requirement. Li Yi found out from Xiao Huan that last year was a disaster year with a large decrease in harvest, so everyone in the stronghold was currently living a very difficult life. In all fairness, if it was Li Yi himself, he definitely wouldn't do what the big man did under such circumstances. Perhaps, this was the most admirable aspect of the people in this world. Li Yi couldn't help but admit that he was moved by the simple and honest big man in front of him, or in other words, the simple customs of this world. Chapter 27. When he was cooking in the afternoon, the sesame oil that he had pocketed during the Chiao festival finally came in handy. In this era where there was only steaming and boiling, being able to eat authentic stir-fried dishes was the happiest thing that Li Yi could feel at this stage. He used lettuce leaves to make a plate of stir-fried green vegetables. After the water celery from the river was blanched in the pot, it had a special flavor when mixed with cold water. The pheasant that the burly man brought over was made into chicken mushroom stew by Li Yi. They were all fresh ingredients, plus a simplified version of kung pao chicken and a delicious mushroom soup. 2 meat dishes, 2 vegetables, and 1 soup. In the future, it might seem a little shabby, but now, it made Li Yi feel like he was celebrating the new year. For many people living in the Willow Leaf Village, they might not even be able to eat so much during the new year. Xiao Huan. When the last mushroom soup was out of the pot, Li Yi tasted it. It tasted pretty good, so he shouted towards the door. The little servant girl ran in like the wind and hurriedly said, "Young master, what's the matter? Take some of these dishes and send them to Uncle Fang's house. We'll start eating when you come back." Li Yi took off his apron and said to Xiao Huan while washing his hands, "I'll go right away." Xiao Huan was already craving for food just by smelling the fragrance of the dishes. She quickly found a food container from the kitchen, washed it, and divided a portion of each dish. At this moment, in a dilapidated courtyard, a dirty child looked at the burly man named Fang and said weakly, "Father, I'm hungry." A woman in coarse clothes touched her child's head lovingly, and a trace of helplessness flashed in her eyes. The burly man glared at a dog that was limping in the courtyard. In the end, he did not manage to snatch back the last cornbread. When he turned his head, a trace of bitterness appeared on his face, and he said, "Bear with it a little longer. When I get my salary tomorrow, I'll come back and buy you some steamed buns." Hearing the word steamed buns, a trace of color suddenly appeared in the child's eyes. He nodded his head and said, "Father, I'm not hungry anymore. I'll go out and play." Looking at the back of the child who seemed to be full of energy, the big man shook his head helplessly. For them, as long as the harvest of one year was bad, the following year would be a torment. At the same time, the naughty brat, who had just opened the door and was about to run out, saw a figure at the door. He suddenly stopped in his tracks and stood there, calling out in a low voice, "Sister Xiao Huan." The big man turned his head and saw Xiao Huan standing at the door. He hurried over and asked, "Xiao Huan, why are you here? Is there something on Mrs. side?" "That's not it." Chapter 28. The Anqing Prefecture was located in the southwest of the Jing Kingdom. It was once the capital of the Jing Kingdom and was extremely prosperous. It was the second largest capital city in the Jing Kingdom after Jingdu at this moment. On the official road leading to the southwest gate of the Anqing Prefecture, a few sturdy horses with shiny fur galloped over. A woman dressed in white pulled on the reins and the horses let out a long neigh in pain. They raised their hooves high in the air and stopped some distance away from the city gate. Neigh! A few sounds rang out in succession. A few sturdy men skillfully dismounted from their horses. The horses' hooves trampled the ground in a chaotic manner, stirring up a cloud of dust. "Son-in-law, we've arrived at the prefecture." The burly man with the surname Fang grabbed Li Yi's arm and jumped down from his horse. Li Yi raised his head and looked at the city walls that were dozens of feet high. He couldn't see the end of the city walls on either side. He couldn't help but feel his legs turn to jelly and his vision become dizzy. Blurg! He held onto a willow tree by the moat and vomited for a while. Only then did the feeling of extreme discomfort subside a little. Of course, he didn't feel a sense of admiration just because he saw the city walls that were more than 10 meters high. Instead, he used this behavior to express the shock in his heart. For a person who had never ridden a horse before, the fact that he was still able to stand after being forced to ride on a horse for more than 10 kilometers on a bumpy mountain road was already proof that Li Yi's body was very strong. His first trip to the prefecture city wasn't as perfect as Li Yi had imagined. Before he even entered the city gates, his entire body already felt like it was going to collapse. "Son-in-law, your body is too weak. You need to train properly," the burly man with the surname Fong couldn't help but say when he saw Li Yi's uncomfortable appearance. He had only ridden a horse for a short while and he was already vomiting like this. This new son-in-law was good in every aspect, but his body was too weak. He didn't seem like a man at all. Li Yi glared fiercely at the burly man and couldn't be bothered to speak to him. He turned his head and looked at the bustling city with a relatively formal gaze for the first time. There was an endless stream of pedestrians going in and out of the city gates. Goods and carriages were mixed among them. It looked crowded but orderly. Looking inside the city gates, there were even more people. The streets on both sides were filled with all kinds of stalls. One could even hear the hawkers' shouts from outside the city gates. Li Yi followed Lu Rui and the others into the city gates. He finally felt the prosperity of the city. The streets under his feet were all paved with square bluestones. The buildings on both sides of the street had rolled-up eaves with carved balustrades and painted phoenixes. It was full of ancient vibe. Passers-by dressed in ancient costumes passed by him, which made Li Yi realize once again what kind of world he was in now. The horse that the burly man with the surname Fong was leading was certainly not the property of the Willow Leaf village. The Jing kingdom had always been short of horses. To a large extent, they had to rely on importing horses from other countries to meet their normal needs. The price of a horse in the market was about 70 to 80 taels of silver. At this time, one tael of silver was about equivalent to 1,000 copper coins. Li Yi roughly estimated the price of goods in this era. One copper coin was probably equivalent to 50 cents in the future. In this way, a horse should be converted into RMB, which should be a lot of money anyway. If every family in the Willow Leaf village had a horse, they wouldn't have to eat rice and vegetables. The average standard of living would definitely be above moderately well off, and they would take big strides into the middle class. This was just like an old saying that a person who rode a handsome horse was not necessarily a prince. It could also be a horse breeder. Yes, raising horses was the sideline of some people in the Willow Leaf village, including the burly man with the surname Fong. Most of these people's fathers were mountain bandits, so they had the pure blood of mountain bandits. Mountain bandits who didn't know how to raise horses were not good mountain bandits. Fortunately, they all inherited the excellent genes of their fathers. Although they all looked rough, their equestrian skills were superior to ordinary people. They could use this skill to earn some extra money and supplement their family income. However, since ancient times, most of the coolies could only get enough food and clothing. The exploitation in the feudal society was even more serious. The wages they received could only ensure that their families wouldn't starve to death. Every month, the burly man would take these horses down the mountain for inspection and collect their wages for the previous month. On the way here, Li Yi had asked him about it. The monthly wage for raising a horse was 100 copper coins, which was pitifully low. It was only enough to buy a few caddies of rice. Furthermore, there were only 4 months of time to raise a horse every year. With a few hundred copper coins, they would have to support them for an entire year. After making an appointment to meet at the place where they would go back, the burly man with the surname Fong and the others took the horses and left. In the blink of an eye, Li Yi and Rui also disappeared, leaving him alone. This made Li Yi confused. Weren't they afraid that he would take the opportunity to run away? Thinking of the crazy old man who wanted to catch him, he couldn't go back to his previous home. Weighing the money bag, Li Yi suddenly felt that staying in the Willow Leaf village was not bad. He spent 4 copper coins to buy 2 steamed buns on the street and took a bite. The skin was thin and there was a lot of filling. After eating the 2 steamed buns, the hunger in his stomach suddenly disappeared. Li Yi couldn't help sighing in his heart. In the past, when he bought steamed buns outside, he couldn't even see the filling after taking a bite. Those guys who only had money in their eyes wanted to sell steamed buns as steamed buns. In comparison, the people in ancient times were more honest. He had already spent 4 of the 128 copper coins. Originally, Li Yi wanted to rely on this money to live a good life, but the reality was cruel. After walking around the street, Li Yi found that it seemed that he could only eat steamed buns. Whether in modern or ancient times, he was poor, which made Li Yi inexplicably sad in his heart. Especially after seeing the prosperity of Anqing Prefecture, Li Yi had made up his mind to immediately think of ways to make money when he went back. Modern people had their pride, not to mention that he had a cheating device that could be said to be against nature. If he still lived a life of eating rice and vegetables all day, it would be too embarrassing for a time traveler. While walking around, he bought some vegetable seeds from a roadside stall. He happened to see hawthorn selling in a nearby stall, so he also bought a few kilograms. He hadn't used the white sugar that he had embezzled last time, and it had been a long time since he had tasted the taste of candied hawthorn. Even in the entire Jing Kingdom, Anqing Prefecture could be considered as one of the most prosperous cities. There were brothels, and rows upon rows of brothels. It was a pity that Li Yi could only wander in front of these places. After walking around the street, he was a little tired, so he found a corner to rest. This was a street corner with slightly less people. Not far from Li Yi, there was a table and a chair. On the table, there was a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. There were also some paper tubes on the side. A young scholar was sitting there, holding a thread-bound book in his hands and reading it attentively. These days, when scholars were short of money, it was a very common thing to set up a table and sell paintings and calligraphy on the street. Just as Li Yi was thinking about whether or not he should do the same in the future when he was short of money, a man wearing coarse clothes suddenly ran over from afar. He ran up to the scholar, said a few words while panting, and then left. After the man left, the scholar's expression immediately became a little anxious and nervous. He suddenly raised his head and saw Li Yi standing under a nearby tree. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he quickly walked over. Chapter 29. Under Li Yi's flabbergasted gaze, the scholar walked in front of him and cupped his hands in greeting. With a slightly hurried tone, he said, "Brother, I have some urgent matters at home. Could you help me look after this painting stall for a moment? Once I'm done with the matters at home, I'll rush over as soon as possible." Li Yi could tell that the scholar had really encountered something. Since he had nothing better to do, and he didn't know when Lu Rui and the burly man surnamed Fong would arrive, he wouldn't lose anything by helping the scholar look after his stall. He could even find a place to rest, so why not? Under the scholar's expectant gaze, Li Yi nodded. "Many thanks, brother." Seeing that Li Yi had agreed, the scholar's face lit up with joy. After saying a word of thanks, he hurriedly left. After the scholar left, Li Yi walked to the front of the painting stall and sat on a chair. He picked up the book that the scholar had been reading and began to leisurely read it. After a few minutes, Li Yi shook his head and threw the book to the side. The book was filled with biographies of some people. It was dry and boring to the extreme. He didn't know how the scholar had read it with such relish. Li Yi was only a fake scholar. It was difficult for him to sit there and not move while reading this thing. He looked at the table and saw a completed painting. The painting was of a woman. Her face was like a hibiscus, her figure was slim, and she was quite beautiful. He casually pulled out a few paper tubes and opened them. They were all completed paintings of people and landscapes. From a layman's point of view, the scholar's painting skills were not bad. However, when he thought about it, it was normal. In this era, even if scholars weren't proficient in poetry and painting, they would definitely know a little. If they didn't have some skill, they would be embarrassed to call themselves a scholar. Looking at the things like brushes, ink, and paints, Li Yi couldn't help but feel an itch. Over the past few days, he had also digested quite a number of books on painting techniques. In his heart, he was still thinking that if he couldn't make it in the future, he would learn from this scholar and set up a painting stall on the street. He would definitely not starve to death by selling paintings for a living. There was no more Xian paper in the stockade village. Li Yi had never found an opportunity to practice. He rolled up the painting on the table and put it aside. He grabbed a blank piece of Xian paper and dipped the brush in ink. After thinking for a while, he raised the brush and started drawing on the paper. Before long, the outline of a woman's face appeared on the paper. Although the facial features were not drawn, it was not difficult to tell that the person Li Yi wanted to draw was Lu Rui based on the shape of the face. It's my first time drawing a 3D character, so I'll use her to practice. Recalling Lu Rui's cold expression, Li Yi's face curled into a wicked smile. When he put down his brush, he began to draw the facial features and figure. 3D painting sounded very difficult and pretentious, but it was nothing more than the handling of light and shadow, the difference in proportions, and some techniques of composition. As long as one had a little bit of painting foundation, it was actually not difficult to grasp. Although it was his first time drawing a 3D character, he had actually practiced it countless times in his mind. He did not stop his brush at all. Not long after, a woman who looked similar to Lu Rui appeared on the Xian paper. However, it was different from ordinary paintings. The woman in the painting not only had a vivid expression and was no different from a real person, but she also had a little more liveliness, as if she would walk out of the painting in the next moment. Ordinary 3D paintings were mostly done through the control of proportions and the adjustment of light and shadow. It needed to be looked at from a certain special angle in order to display the 3D effect. Li Yi had slightly weakened this aspect so that the 3D effect was not as strong. He had greatly preserved the good proportions and created a vivid feeling. Those overly impactful images were not easy for the people of this era to accept. Change had to be done bit by bit, and this was only a small attempt by Li Yi. After finishing the painting, Li Yi looked at it carefully for a while and nodded, indicating that he was satisfied with his work. When he looked up, he suddenly saw an unfamiliar face. Because Li Yi's action was too abrupt, the other party did not seem to be able to react. The tips of their noses were only a few centimeters apart. If they were a little closer, perhaps Li Yi's first kiss after coming to this world would be lost. Especially when the other party was a man. Although this man was a little handsome, if such a thing really happened, he was afraid that he would feel disgusted for at least 10 days to half a month. "Who are you?" Li Yi suddenly took 2 steps back and looked at the young man standing on the other side of the table with a look of disgust. He was looking at Lu Rui's painting with an amazed gaze and blurted out. The luxuriously dressed young man, who looked to be about the same age as Li Yi, was still staring at the painting that Li Yi had just completed. He clicked his tongue in admiration. "This painting is so strange. The woman in the painting seems to be walking out of the paper." Li Yi curled his lips. Although this guy was dressed decently, he was still a bumpkin who had not seen much of the world. It was just a 3D painting, and he was already so surprised. "This painting is really strange," the young man murmured. Then he looked up at Li Yi and said with interest, "Use this style and draw one for me." "No." Li Yi did not even look at him. He said lightly and sat back in the chair. After standing for so long, his waist was sore. It was still more comfortable to sit. "Why?" The young man was stunned when he heard this and asked. "Sorry, my principle is to only paint women, not men," Li Yi said lazily. The young man raised his eyebrows. He did not expect that a street art dealer would have such a rule. He looked at him from head to toe and suddenly said, "1 tael of silver." 1 tael of silver. Li Yi heard this and was slightly moved. 1 tael of silver was almost equivalent to 1,000 copper coins. With the current market price, it was enough to buy 2 meters of rice. 1 meter of rice was about 150 caddies. Even if they ate rice every day, it would be enough for a family of 4 to eat for a long time. Looking at this guy's clothes, he did not look like a poor person. Just the jade pendant hanging on his waist was probably worth a lot of money. He should not be lying. However, as a man, how could he bend his back for a mere 2 meters of rice? Li Yi shook his head and said, "I won't paint for 1 tael of silver." 5 taels. The young man saw that Li Yi was obviously moved and his lips curled into a smile as he spoke again. 5 taels of silver, 10 meters of rice. Li Yi's expression was conflicted. After a long time, he squeezed out a few words from his throat, "I won't paint for 5 taels." As a man, he would not bend his back even for 10 meters of rice. 10 taels. The young man's expression was calm as he spoke again. As soon as he finished speaking, Li Yi abruptly stood up from his chair. This sudden action startled the young man. At the sight of this scene, a few figures who were squatting in a corner nearby stood up abruptly, their hands involuntarily reaching for their waists. At this moment, Li Yi warmly patted the young man's shoulder and smiled. "When I first saw you, I felt a sense of familiarity. Now that I think about it, you look very much like an old friend of mine." Based on this point alone, what harm is there in breaking the rules today? Seeing that the scholar in front of him seemed to have changed into a different person, the young man was stunned and could not react for a moment. Chapter 30. This scholar is also a wonderful person. After about an hour, the young nobleman glanced at Li Yi and nodded with satisfaction as he held the portrait that Li Yi had just drawn for him. He snapped his fingers lightly and a passerby who was squatting at a nearby stall immediately stood up. He took out a silver ingot from his bosom and threw it on the table in front of Li Yi with a "paw" sound. The money and goods were settled. Seeing the young nobleman walking away, the passers-by around him suddenly reduced by half. Li Yi imitated the scene in the TV and bit the ingot with his teeth, but he didn't bite anything. He raised his head and saw that the passers-by were looking at him with an unusually fiery gaze. He hurriedly put the silver ingot in his bosom. To some extent, this was the first pot of gold he had truly earned after coming to this world. Don't look down on these 10 taels of silver. With the current market price of 1 tael of silver, 1 tael of silver could buy 2 stone meters of rice. These 10 taels of silver were enough for a family of 4 to live on for several years. Touching the silver ingot in his bosom, Li Yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The people in the city were indeed rich. In this way, he only needed to draw a painting like this every day and he would soon be able to live an early retirement life. Of course, this was only the most ideal situation. Except for that nobleman who looked dignified but seemed to have a screw loose in his head, there were probably not many people who would spend 10 taels of silver to buy such a painting. With the silver ingot in hand, Li Yi's mood was much better. He lay comfortably on the chair and basked in the sun while waiting for the scholar to come back. This time, he didn't have to wait for long. The figure of the scholar hurriedly ran over. The two of them exchanged some greetings. The scholar gratefully held on to Li Yi's hand and didn't let go. He kept saying thank you until Li Yi noticed that the passers-by's gazes had changed. Only then did he hurriedly wave his hand, indicating that he wanted to leave. Of course, before he left, he took the portrait of Rui with him. The scholar didn't say anything about it. Instead, he told Li Yi his address and invited him to come over and compare his painting skills when he had the time. Holding the 10 taels of silver, Li Yi felt a lot more at ease. He could now pay for the things he couldn't afford just now. However, he already had a lot of things in his hands. It would be better to wait for the big fellow surnamed Fong and the others to return. After all, there was free labor for him to use. It would be a waste not to use it. He walked to the big willow tree where he had agreed to meet Lu Rui and the others. He found a clean rock and sat down, waiting for Mr. Fong and the others to return. "I'm afraid that it's at least 10 silver coins." As he said this, he extended his hand and gestured with his fist to the large man. 10 silver coins. The knife-scarred man licked his lips. 10 silver coins was enough for him to live a carefree life for a while as long as he didn't go to the famous money-squandering dens in the city. "Go in." The large man waved his hand and everyone entered the alley. Damn it. After running for more than 10 steps, he saw a high wall at the end of the alley. Li Yi cursed. He didn't think that this would be a dead end. When he turned his head, he saw that those people had already entered. "Scholar, do you want to hand over the silver coins yourself, or do you want us to help you?" The leader of the knife-scarred man walked in front of Li Yi with a face full of ridicule. He crossed his arms and looked at him condescendingly. This large man had the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. He was at least 1.9 meters tall, close to 2 meters. He was a full head taller than Li Yi. When he spoke, he completely looked down on Li Yi. The people behind him also looked at him with a mocking gaze. It was as if they were looking at a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. The silver coins that had just been in his hands hadn't even warmed up when they were about to be snatched away. The grievance in Li Yi's heart at this time couldn't be described with words. Li Yi did not even think of resisting. Not to mention this ferocious-looking burly man, Li Yi felt that he only had a chance of winning if he fought against the wretched young man behind him. If he lost the silver coins, he could earn it again. If he lost his life, he would have nothing. Even if these people didn't intend to take his life, they would certainly beat him up. This was something that Li Yi didn't want to see. He sighed in his heart. He raised his hand and reached into his bosom, preparing to take out the ingot of silver. Seeing Li Yi's action, a smile appeared on the large man's face. "This scholar is quite tactful," this thought just appeared in the large man's mind. In the next moment, his smile froze on his face. "Damn knife scar, what did you just say? Say it again for me to hear." In the eyes of the knife-scarred man, the scholar's hand had already reached into his bosom, but he suddenly took it out. His face suddenly changed into a mocking and disdainful expression as he looked at him indifferently. Chapter 31. Damn Dao Ba, what did you just say? Say it again for me to hear. Surrounded by more than 10 burly men in the narrow alley, the handsome scholar looked disdainfully at the leader of the group, Dao Ba. His voice was clearly transmitted to everyone's ears. The people behind Dao Ba were stunned. They didn't dare to believe that at this moment, this scholar actually dared to say such words. Was he not afraid of death? It should be known that the boss hated it when people mentioned the word Dao Ba in front of him. Quietly looking at the boss's ashen face, everyone couldn't help but take a step back. They were worried that the scene that was about to happen would be too cruel and bloody. "What did you just say? Say it again." Dao Ba looked at Li Yi with an ashen face. His eyes flashed with a dangerous glint. "It's fine if you're ugly, but to think that there's something wrong with your ears as well. Just what kind of beliefs have supported you to live until now?" Li Yi looked at the scarred man with a pitiful gaze and said with some pity. "What kind of belief has supported me to live until now?" The people behind Dao Ba were stunned when they heard this. They didn't immediately understand the meaning of this sentence. When it came to scolding people, as a young man of the 21st century, Li Yi's level was clearly several streets ahead of the people of this era. These ruffians who hadn't even read a book, who knew how many brain cells had died. It took a while for them to understand the meaning of this sentence. Afterwards, everyone looked at Li Yi with a strange expression. In their eyes, there was actually a faint kind of worship. This scholar's mouth was too poisonous. These ruffians of the ancient times were usually full of profanities, but it was just trash, stupid pig, and other vulgar words that didn't have any technical difficulty. Those with a little bit of cultural literacy might say a few words in classical Chinese, such as, your mother's maid, your mother is a concubine, and so on, but who would take swearing to such a high level? What kind of belief has supported you to live until now? There wasn't a single profanity in this sentence, but if one were to talk about the meaning, it was more profound than all the swearing. This was simply raising swearing to a new level. Courting death. The scarred man's face had long since turned red. Li Yi's words had successfully aroused his anger, making him want to immediately destroy this scholar in front of him and completely disappear from this world. As he roared, he clenched his fist and smashed it toward Li Yi's face. The 2-meter-tall man had an incomparably sturdy physique. One of his arms was as thick as Li Yi's thigh. The muscles on his exposed arms were bulging, and his sandbag-sized fists carried a whistling sound, full of momentum. Li Yi was stunned for a moment, and he immediately retreated to Lu Rui's side. Then, he felt terrible. He had been so confident earlier because he had a hostage in his hands. Now that the sword on the scarred man's neck was gone, could the two of them, could Lu Rui deal with so many ruffians alone? After feeling the sword on his neck disappear, the scarred man suddenly took 2 steps forward, and returned to the middle of the ruffians. He reached out his hand to touch his neck, only to realize that there was a bloodstain on his hand. A trace of fear and lingering fear appeared on his face, followed by endless anger. He pointed his finger at Li Yi and Lu Rui, revealing his white teeth, and said fiercely, "Go. Break the scholar's legs. Remember not to hurt the woman." The ruffians behind him rolled up their sleeves, and their eyes were filled with murderous intent. When they looked at Lu Rui, their eyes swept over her body, and they couldn't help but lick their lips, and a trace of greed appeared in their eyes. Lu Rui's pretty face did not change as she watched the ruffians approach, but there was a faint trace of mockery and disdain in the depths of her eyes. "Son-in-law, second lady, so you're here." At this moment, a rough voice suddenly rang out from the alley. Chapter 32. Just when Li Yi was worried that Lu Rui would not be able to deal with these ruffians, Mr. Fong appeared at the entrance of the alley just in time. The burly man surnamed Fong was not alone. The other men who had come down from the stronghold with him were also by his side. "Get out of here. This is none of your business." At this time, the scar-faced man was unable to restrain his anger. Suddenly, he saw a group of idlers appear at the entrance of the alley. He coldly berated them and was about to personally break the legs of the scholar who had just kicked him in the butt in front of so many of his brothers, causing him to lose all face. "Get out of here. If you don't, I'll beat you too." Seeing that the few Tian Shihan were still standing at the entrance of the alley even though their big brother had already given the order, he immediately yelled out in anger and walked towards the burly man surnamed Fong. There were more than 10 people on their side, and the number of people on the other side was less than half of their number. The young man was not afraid when he walked over. He pointed at Mr. Fong's nose and scolded, "What are you still doing here? Hurry up." He swallowed the word, "get out," before he could say it. To be precise, he was kicked back by Mr. Fong. Although he hadn't figured out what was going on, this group of ignorant ruffians was obviously looking for trouble with the son-in-law and the second Mississippi. How could the burly man surnamed Fong be polite to them? He lifted his foot and kicked them. A figure suddenly flew from the entrance of the alley. He crossed a distance of 2 or 3 feet and smashed into the crowd. 2 people were instantly knocked down to the ground. They struggled for a long time but could not get up. The sudden turn of events caused the entire place to fall silent. Li Yi stared blankly at the young man who was kicked 5 or 6 meters away by Mr. Fong. He was a little stunned. To be honest, he had only seen such a scene in action movies in his life. However, movies were just movies. When he saw such a scene in reality, the shock in his heart was still indescribable. That man, who had always looked simple and honest, was actually so strong. Li Yi was not the only one who was stunned. The scar-faced man and his group of ruffians were also stunned. Seeing their underlings being kicked away and lying on the ground, unable to get up, after a short moment of shock, everyone's expressions became fierce. However, as vicious as they were, there were others who were even more vicious than them. The burly man surnamed Fong couldn't hold it in any longer. He shouted at the top of his lungs and rushed forward like a bull. "Are you blind? How dare you bully our Willow Leaf village? You even dare to find trouble with second young mistress and young master. You must be tired of living. It's been a long time since I've fought with anyone. My body is itching. I've finally made it this time." Almost in the next second, several men behind the burly man surnamed Fong also rushed forward. Their faces were full of excited expressions, and they were quite eager to have a try. As a mountain bandit, they had always been the ones bullying others. When had they ever been bullied by others? Although they had been good for a long time, the aggressive nature in their bones couldn't be erased. Before those ruffians could react, several people had already rushed in front of them. Fight without a word. At this moment, Li Yi deeply understood the meaning of this sentence. The burly man was like a tiger in a flock of sheep. When they raised their hands and chopped down, there would be one person lying on the ground. Their movements were bold and beautiful. This was a complete crushing of strength. In just a dozen breaths of time, everyone, including the scar-faced man, was lying on the ground. They were either holding their arms or legs, crying and shouting for their parents. On the contrary, the burly man surnamed Fong and his group were not red or out of breath. There was no sweat on their foreheads. They stood there and rubbed their palms. Their eyes swept back and forth among the ruffians lying on the ground, as if they wanted to continue. Bang! The scar-faced man had just used his hands to prop himself up. After the burly man surnamed Fong kicked him, he lay on the ground and didn't dare to move again. Bah! Several people spat on the ground at the same time, their eyes full of contempt. Li Yi understood the meaning in the eyes of the burly man surnamed Fong and his group. You scum with less than 5 battle power, you don't even have the qualifications to make this or take action. He watched as the usually smiling, straightforward, and honest men turned into super scions one by one, completely different from the people he knew before. They were just a group of farmers, but they actually had 2 faces. Even Li Yi had begun to suspect whether this group of people had a split personality or something. However, this was not important for the time being. Under the puzzled gazes of the burly man surnamed Fong and his group, Li Yi jogged over to the ruffians lying on the ground and skillfully fished out a few copper coins, a few silver coins, and a few copper coins from their pockets. At this moment, he was thinking that since the other party wanted his silver, they would naturally have to pay the same price. This group of poor people didn't even bring more money when they came out. This bit of money wasn't even enough to compensate him for the mental damage. Li Yi, who was busy collecting the mental damage compensation, didn't know that the burly man surnamed Fong and the others behind him were watching his skillful movements with their mouths agape. Damn, this awareness, this technique, who the F***ck is the real bandit here. In a short while, there were already many people outside the alley. Chapter 33. Where are they? The constables were looking at the wall, not knowing how to chase after them. Suddenly, a voice came from behind them. Hearing this voice, everyone felt as if they had been granted amnesty. They turned their heads and pointed at the high wall behind them, saying weakly, "They ran away, ran away. Why aren't you chasing after them?" The woman wearing the uniform of a constable with a saber hanging from her waist glared at the constables. With a light leap, she was already on top of the wall. Just as she was about to chase after them, the constables below were shocked and hurriedly shouted, "Boss, wait! Is there anything else?" The female constable turned around and asked with a frown. One of the constables immediately said, "There are too many of them. It's too dangerous for the boss to go alone. Call a few more brothers later and we'll definitely be able to catch them." "Yes, boss." Everyone obviously didn't want the female constable to chase after them. At this moment, another constable stepped forward and pointed at the ruffian who was still lying on the ground, saying, "What should we do with these people? Should we send them to the clinic first?" The woman glanced at the knife-scarred man and the others. She did not hide the disgust on her face and coldly said, "They are not good people either. Capture them first and lock them up. We'll talk after we interrogate them." When the constables heard this, their faces all turned bitter. Usually, when they encountered street fights like this, if the circumstances were not serious, they would be punished and punished. This kind of thing happened a few times a day. If they were arrested and sent to the prison cell every time, wouldn't they, as constables, be busy to death? However, even though they were extremely unwilling, they still had to obediently carry out this lady's order. Not to mention her status as a constable, they were supposed to be under her jurisdiction. Even the county magistrate had to be polite to her, let alone them, who were just mere constables. Dejectedly, she walked to the ruffian who was still howling on the ground and kicked him hard. "Get up and follow us back to the county yamen." The development of the situation had taken a turn. The scarred man and the other ruffians were dumbfounded. They couldn't figure out how these constables handled cases. This time, they were clearly the victims, okay? Seeing that these constables had no room for negotiation, they felt as if they had eaten Chinese gold thread, bitter. He looked at these constables with resentment in his eyes. His heart was filled with resentment. "You guys are abusing your power. You guys are handling the case recklessly. You guys are blind." One was happy while the other was sad. The ruffians were taken away dejectedly, but the onlookers couldn't help but cheer. Obviously, these people had been bullied by them a lot. "This time, I'll let you off for now." The valiant and formidable-looking female constable stood on top of the wall. She glanced in a certain direction and leaped down lightly. A constable trotted over with a fawning look on his face. "Boss, they've all been brought back, outside the prefectural city, at a tea stall by the roadside." With Lu Rui grabbing onto his shoulder and flying over countless walls, Li Yi finally witnessed what it meant to be able to leap onto roofs and vault over walls. He was a little afraid of heights, so he still had a lingering fear. When he finally got out of the city and sat down to calm himself down, the familiar voice of the man surnamed Fong came from the side. "Son-in-law, why did those ruffians come for you?" Even now, the man surnamed Fong was still curious about this matter. Generally speaking, if one was targeted by those ruffians, it was either because they were rich or because they were colored. These two, if those ruffians liked men, then what happened just now would be easy to explain. Although the young master didn't have much money, even the man surnamed Fong couldn't deny that in the eyes of those with special hobbies, the young master was probably a rare beauty. What's so strange about that? "They wanted to rob me." Li Yi glanced at the man surnamed Fong and said. Haha, the man surnamed Fong and the others were stunned at first, but then they laughed honestly. Their faces clearly showed that they didn't believe him at all. Those ruffians also had proper business to do. So many people were gathered there just to rob a few copper coins. They had never seen such idle ruffians. It seemed like it was really because of the second reason. The man surnamed Fong thought in his heart with absolute certainty. This time, even Lu Rui looked at Li Yi with a slightly mocking expression. This obvious expression of disbelief dealt a huge blow to Li Yi's self-esteem. Lu Rui was fine, but Li Yi was already used to it. Even these ruffians dared to look down on him. Why would he tell them that he had earned 10 taels of silver with a wave of his hand? He took out the silver ingot and slammed it on the table. He ignored the shocked gazes of the man surnamed Fong and the others and continued to drink his tea. 10 taels of silver was undoubtedly an astronomical figure to the people present. If they were frugal, their families wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing for the next few years. They worked hard to herd the horses for a month, but their wages were only about 100 copper coins. The silver ingot in front of them was more than 100 times their wages. Even Lu Rui's pretty face finally lit up. She looked at Li Yi again. After a long time, the man surnamed Fang swallowed a mouthful of saliva and raised his head to look at Li Yi as he asked, young master, this silver, could it be that you stole it? Other than this reason, he couldn't believe that Li Yi had managed to earn so much money in such a short period of time. What a bumpkin. Li Yi cast a disdainful glance at the burly man with the surname Fang. He waved the painting tube in his hand and said faintly, "This is the meticulous brushwork fee for painting for people in the city just now." Painting? The man surnamed Fang was stunned. 10 taels of silver for a painting. How was this painting? This was clearly robbery. They thought about how they had worked so hard for a few copper coins, but this person had earned 10 taels of silver in such a short period of time. Everyone felt sad, but when they raised their heads to look at Li Yi, their expressions changed drastically. As expected of a scholar, young master was still the best. Not to mention 10 taels of silver, even if they were given 1 or 2 taels of silver, their lives in the stockade village would not be so difficult. It was even possible that they could eat meat every few days. Although these people were only boorish men, Li Yi still felt a little proud to be looked at by so many boorish men with such admiring gazes. When people were proud, they would always feel a little inflated. Looking at everyone's admiring gazes, Li Yi felt extremely comfortable. He waved his hand and said in an extremely forthright manner, "Today's tea is on me." The total cost of tea for the few of them was only 5 copper coins. Li Yi took back the silver and happily paid the bill with his private stash. Suddenly, he felt something. When he turned his head, he realized that Lu Rui was looking at him strangely. Chapter 34. For any family in Willow Leaf Village, 10 taels of silver was a huge sum of money. Even for Lu Rui, it was the first time she had seen so much money in her life. But at this moment, when she looked at Li Yi, she was thinking about more than this. A few days ago, on Chinese Valentine's Day, the poem "Celestial on the Magpie Bridge" was widely spread in Willow Leaf Village. Even illiterate girls in the village could recite it completely. Lu Rui did not know much about poetry. When she heard Li Yi's poem from Xiao Huan's mouth, she only found it to be catchy. It sounded rather interesting. Especially the last sentence, "If love lasts forever, why stay together day and night?" It seemed to make some sense. Of course, there were times when she would think about more things. If she didn't have a deep understanding of the relationship between a man and a woman, she definitely wouldn't be able to write such a poem. Had this scholar experienced something exciting in the past? Could it be that in his heart, there was also a woman whom he yearned for but couldn't meet? But on the surface, it didn't seem like it. Thinking of his lazy, greedy face, and his stealing second aunt's chicken, it was hard to imagine what a powerful poem such a person could write. However, she could only think about it in her heart, and it was not appropriate to ask him. As for deeper things, such as whether a poem was good or bad, or how good it was, she had no concept of these things in her heart. Poetry was something that scholars played with. She could grab any scholar off the street and he or she would probably be able to come up with something similar. But after seeing some things with her own eyes, she realized that things didn't seem to be like this. Just now, when she was buying some women's daily necessities on the street, she happened to overhear 2 women talking about a poem called "Immortals of the Magpie Bridge." The content was exactly the same as the one she had heard before. Later on, when they talked about the author of the poem, both of them expressed their admiration for the gifted scholar named Li Yi. Until now, the talented scholar they were talking about gradually overlapped with the lazy figure in Lu Rui's mind. After that, she paid more attention and heard more information. For example, this poem came from a poetry meeting on the night of the Double Seventh Festival. It was said that someone picked up a prayer lantern on a pleasure boat. This poem, which caused an uproar among the literati of Anqing Prefecture, was written on this prayer lantern. Regardless of whether it was true or not, this rumor undoubtedly added a layer of mystery to the entire matter. However, this was a legendary story that most people only talked about after a meal. There were still a few people who did not doubt its authenticity. Lu Rui was one of them. She saw Xiao Huan's prayer lantern fly with her own eyes. At that time, no one in Willow Village would have thought that the ordinary poem written on the lantern would cause such a stir in a certain place. It was said that the champion of the Qixi Poetry Festival, a famous scholar from Qing and Prefecture, had seen the poem, The Immortal of the Magpie Bridge. He tore his own poem into pieces and said, "I will never write another Qixi Poetry Festival again in this life." This shocked everyone, and it added fuel to the fire of the whole matter. After the poetry meeting, a special person compiled the Double Seventh Festival Poetry Anthology. This poem, Flying Poem from Beyond the Heavens, was ranked first. Just like that, a scholar named Li Yi was known by the literati of Qing and Prefecture, singers, actors, and many women who admired this poem. Those who were chosen to compile the poetry anthology were naturally not ordinary people. At the very least, they were talented enough to convince everyone. Since ancient times, there has been no first place in literature. In the past, there would always be a debate about the order of the poems chosen. But this time, no one had a different opinion about this Celestial on the Magpie Bridge being ranked first. At the same time, the gifted scholar called Li Yi had captured the hearts of countless young ladies with his words. If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? Of course, it wasn't just those young ladies. Some of the women who had truly experienced the twists and turns of their relationships were probably even more affected by these words. Even though his origin was still a mystery, it did not affect the admiration of the women. Even Li Yi himself did not know about this. Of course, Lu Rui knew about this. Thinking of the intoxicated expressions on the two women's faces as they talked, Lu Rui could not imagine how they would react if they knew that the peerless scholar they admired was this guy in front of her. Of course, she would never have imagined that the poem he had casually composed would be so good. Of all the scholars in Qing and Fu, not a single one could compare. Lu Rui did not know much about scholars. Even now, she still could not accept that the person she had casually snatched was so good. At this moment, she pushed these thoughts aside and lowered her head to see the paper tube that Li Yi had placed on the table. She reached out to take it. Beside her, Li Yi raised his head and saw that Lu Rui was preparing to open the painting. His heart suddenly jumped and he hurriedly ran over, reaching out to snatch it. If she saw that he had drawn her, who knew what she would think? Naturally, Li Yi's speed could not catch up to Lu Rui. She lightly raised her hand and Li Yi pounced on empty air. "What is this?" Seeing how anxious he was, Lu Rui raised her eyebrows and asked. "Nothing, it's just a doodle." Li Yi laughed dryly. He could not tell the truth at this time. If she thought that he had feelings for her, brother-in-law falling in love with his sister-in-law, tsk, it sounded quite exciting. Lu Rui looked at him meaningfully. She did not open the painting in her hands and casually threw the painting tube back. Li Yi hurriedly caught it and his heart finally relaxed. How should we spend this money? Not wanting to be entangled in this problem, Li Yi hurriedly changed the topic. Of course, to buy grain. Everyone, including the large man surnamed Fong, spoke almost in unison. To them, even if they had 100 liang of silver, it was far from being able to carry a full jar of rice at home. Living at the bottom of society, nothing could replace the importance of grain and land in their hearts. Their family was already so poor that they could not even feed themselves. They definitely had to buy grain. Even if they did not say it, Li Yi had this plan. With a wave of his hand, the group of people entered the city in a grandiose manner. At the same time, the young girl carrying the painting walked one round on the street. After buying some things, she walked into a rather lavishly decorated small building in a busy area of the street. Chapter 35. Entering through the door, what came into view was an extremely spacious hall. Many coquettishly dressed women swayed their waists as they shuttled through the hall. Occasionally, they would conveniently lie into the arms of a guest, and the man's hands would immediately become unruly. The girl carrying the painting carefully avoided the crowd and went up the stairs on the side to the second floor. After a few steps, the door beside her suddenly opened, and a man with a ruddy face walked out. The girl once again skillfully avoided him, and walked straight to the door of the innermost room. If two lovers love each other for a long time, why would they be together day and night? A mellow voice came from the room. The woman in the room had finished singing one of the most famous lyrics recently, and shook her head. I've practiced for a long time, but my singing is still not good enough. I've ruined this good poem. A gentle woman opposite her looked at her with a smile and said, drunken emo, it's your standards that are too high. Even the sisters in the workshop who are good at singing can't compare to your singing just now. But even so, it still can't compare to Sister Ruoqing. The woman sighed and said in a somewhat helpless tone. The gentle woman only smiled when she heard this, and did not speak. At this moment, the door was gently pushed open, and a young servant girl came in from outside with the painting. Miss, the painting is back. The young servant girl walked to the two of them, and first handed the painting in her hand to the woman who had just sung, and then bowed to the gentle woman. She said softly, Greetings, Miss Wan. Long time no see. Xiao Chui has become more and more beautiful, the gentle woman said with a smile. The young servant girl blushed slightly, and at this moment, the woman had already opened the painting. After looking over, she let out a sound of surprise. Who is she? The woman looked at the unfamiliar woman in the painting, and asked with a puzzled expression. The person in the painting was also an extremely beautiful woman. She had an exquisite figure, and wore a white tight robe. Her arms were crossed in front of her chest, and she was full of heroic spirit. At a glance, the woman in the painting seemed to be walking out of the paper, and it was extremely lifelike. This painting, in the next moment, the woman had already forgotten that the person in the painting wasn't her. She was completely amazed by the painting. As the leading artist of the Jade's Courtyard, she was very proficient in reading, writing, poetry, and painting. She was especially proficient in painting. This painting was exquisite, but there was nothing outstanding about it. However, she had never seen such a new form. There was no need for exquisite brushwork to be able to depict the characters so vividly. Not only were they lifelike, but the feeling of them leaping out of the paper was enough to amaze anyone who saw them. Ah! At this moment, the servant girl also saw the woman in the painting and couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Then, she said with a bitter expression, Miss, I seem to have taken the wrong painting. I'll immediately exchange it. At this moment, she was feeling a little regretful. If she had known this would happen, she would have listened to the scholar's words and opened it to take a look. She wouldn't have made such a mistake. Wait a moment. When the woman heard this, she shook her head and thought for a moment. Then, she said, leave this painting here. When you go to get the painting, tell the painter that we've bought this painting and ask him to paint another one. When the servant girl heard this, she nodded and walked out of the room. After leaving the room, she remembered that the scholar had already closed the stall early today. If she wanted to get the painting, she would probably have to wait until tomorrow. Xiao Chui, you really are an idiot. After cursing a few times in her heart, the servant girl pouted and went downstairs dejectedly. In the room, the woman's gaze was still on the painting. Her beautiful eyes flashed with surprise from time to time. She was filled with curiosity about this painting technique that she had never seen before. When the gentle woman beside her saw her like this, she also looked over curiously. When she saw who the woman in the painting was, she couldn't help but let out a soft cry of surprise. This painting is so strange. It's clearly on the paper, but the woman in the painting looks like she's about to walk out. The woman nodded and said, "This must be a new technique. I don't know who thought of it, but this person's attainments in painting likely far surpass mine." At this point, a look of reverence appeared on her face. She thought that she had to get to know this painting master. At the same time, her gaze moved down. When she saw where the name should have been, her expression suddenly changed and a hint of anger appeared on her face. She scolded, "Which family's naughty child is this? How dare he randomly scribble on this painting? Li-yi, don't let me see you." After finally recognizing the name, the anger on the woman's pretty face became even more intense. In her heart, the naughty child named Li-yi had probably been spanked until his bud bloomed. At this moment, the woman did not notice that after hearing the name Li-yi, the gentle woman beside her was stunned for a moment. Then, she hurriedly looked at the lower left corner of the painting. When she saw the crooked handwriting that looked like the handwriting of a child who had just learned to write, a deep joy suddenly appeared on her beautiful face. After confirming the familiar handwriting, she suddenly grabbed the hand of the woman beside her and said anxiously, "Zuamo, who made this painting? Quick, take me to see him." "Sister Ruoqing, what's wrong?" The woman named Zuamo had never seen the gentle woman show such an expression. After being stunned for a moment, she asked with a face full of surprise. The burly man surnamed Fong and the others each carried 2 stone of grain on their shoulders as they strode out of a grain shop in Qing and Prefecture. The shop assistant at the door stared with wide eyes as he watched these burly men easily carry 2 bags of rice on their shoulders and stride like the wind. He could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. It was not that there were no people who bought so much grain at once. It was not that he was surprised by this. It was just that the strength of these burly men had truly frightened him. 10 stone of rice cost a full 5 taels of silver. In such a short time, half of Li Yi's wealth had already been spent. Although it was a little painful, Li Yi would not hesitate at all to spend the money that should be spent. The horses that had been led down the mountain in the morning still needed to be used for the next 2 days. The group could only walk back. Green Willow Mountain was not far from Anqing Prefecture. It was only about an hour's journey on foot. All the heavy objects were carried by the burly man surnamed Fong and the others. Li Yi felt relaxed. However, it had been a long time since he had walked such a long distance. When he walked back, his legs were still a little sore. The few of them carried 2 coarse cloth bags on their shoulders and swaggered through the stockade. Naturally, it was very easy to attract the attention of others. Of course, compared to these, the big man surnamed Fong was carrying a piece of pork on his shoulder that attracted more attention. Most of the people in the stockade could not even guarantee 2 meals a day. It was unknown how long it had been since many people had touched meat. Suddenly seeing this scene, the impact in their hearts was quite big. Watching them walk away, someone suddenly lowered his head and picked up something from the ground. The crowd took a closer look and found that it was actually a grain of rice. Seeming to have thought of something, everyone's expression changed involuntarily. Could it be that all the things in the bags just now were all rice? There was so much grain. Did they go down the mountain to rob it? Such an absurd thought appeared in everyone's mind. Chapter 36. For most of the families in the stockade village, there was never more than 1 bucket of rice in the rice jar at home. Their daily meals were mainly rice bran mixed with wild vegetables. The Liu family's life was slightly more prosperous, but it was at the level where they could only drink porridge. If the burly man surnamed Fong and the others were carrying rice on their shoulders, this idea was too extravagant, and they didn't even dare to think about it. It should be known that all the families in the entire Willow Leaf village combined might not even be able to gather 1 stone of rice, but those people had at least 10 stone, right? Under everyone's suspicious and shocked gazes, the burly man surnamed Fong and the others walked through the stockade village with their heads held high. When they looked at the direct descendants of the Liu family who usually didn't get along with them, their faces were full of undisguised pride and arrogance. In this day and age, being able to fill one's stomach gave one the right to be arrogant. Those who ate porridge could look down on those who ate bran vegetables, and those who ate rice could naturally look down on those who ate porridge. Carrying rice and meat in the stockade village, one's back could be straighter than others. Xiao Huan was in the courtyard washing the clothes that Li Yi had changed out of yesterday. The courtyard door was suddenly pushed open, and the burly man surnamed Fong and the others walked in with a glowing face, carrying bags on their shoulders. Uncle Fong. Seeing Li Yi and Lu Rui behind the burly man surnamed Fong and the others, the young servant girl hurriedly stood up from the stool. Young master, where should we put the food? Walking into the courtyard, the burly man surnamed Fong shouted at the top of his voice. Li Yi pointed in the direction of the kitchen and said, "Move it all there. Leave half of the meat and 2 stone of the food. Everyone can take the rest and divide it." The burly man surnamed Fong was stunned at first, as if he couldn't believe his ears. Then he hurriedly said, "Young master, you can't, Li Yi waved his hand and didn't wait for the burly man surnamed Fong to continue, "I have the final say on how to divide these things. It's decided." Then, he stretched out his hand and waved it in front of the little maid, who didn't know what was happening. "Don't wash the clothes. Go and boil some hot water first. We need it for bathing later." After running around for a whole day, riding the horse all the way back, and walking all the way back, Li Yi did not have the stamina of the burly man surnamed Fong. He was unbearably tired, and there were probably a few blisters under his feet. Now, he just wanted to take a comfortable hot bath and then have a good sleep. No matter how big the matter was, he would deal with it tomorrow. Thinking like this, he opened his mouth and said to Xiao Huan, "A little to the left, a little to the left. Yes, there." After a long day of hard work, the happiest thing was to have a comfortable hot bath under the service of a beautiful servant girl and then have a good night's sleep. It was a dreamless night of sleep until the next morning. Of course, if a beautiful servant girl could serve him in bed, it would be even better. He didn't think about having a servant girl serve him in bed. A 15 or 16-year-old girl was still underage in the future. Li Yi wasn't that beastly. Towards this adorably silly servant girl, Li Yi had never thought in that direction. Moreover, if he really did this, he was worried that when he woke up tomorrow morning, his wife or sister-in-law would cut off his tool of crime. A moment later, the little servant girl left the room. When she passed by the kitchen, she went in to take a look. Seeing half a piece of pork on the table and 2 stones of white rice on the side, her small mouth slightly opened. It was hard to say whether the expression on her face was surprise or joy. In the past, when she went out to buy things, she would at most buy a small bag of brown rice or flour. There wasn't any extra money at home to buy more things. This was the first time the little servant girl had seen so much food. It seems that the son-in-law bought all of this. After muttering a few words, a trace of a smile appeared on the young girl's face. She faintly felt proud. Putting away the piece of pork, she walked briskly back to the courtyard to wash the clothes that she hadn't finished washing. Halfway through the bath, she remembered that the son-in-law had instructed her to lock something in a cabinet and not let the second young miss see it. The young maidservant hurriedly got up and picked up a painting tube that was placed on the table by the door. Just as she was about to lock it in the cabinet, her footsteps suddenly paused. She peeked into the bedroom and found that Li Yi was already asleep. When she looked at the thing in her hands again, a trace of doubt appeared on her small face. What is it that is so mysterious? Not letting second Miss see, Xiaohuan secretly opened it to take a look. Son-in-law shouldn't know, right? Once again confirming that Li Yi wouldn't suddenly wake up, the young girl pulled open the string on the outside of the painting tube like a thief. When the portrait of an extremely beautiful and unfamiliar girl appeared in front of her, the little servant girl's expression froze. For a moment, she was stunned. After a long time, she stuck out her tongue and said in a small voice, "If two people love each other for a long time, why would they stay together day and night?" The person son-in-law was talking about, could it be this girl? You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.